Good afternoon, or good evening, good morning, depending on what time zone you are in, but welcome to our event. My name is Michael Berry. I am a professor at UCLA in the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures and director of the Center for Chinese Studies, and it's my great pleasure to be hosting the event tonight entitled Return to the Mountain in Conversation with Chung Ling. This is part of our Taiwan Spotlight series, which is generously sponsored by the Ministry of Culture, the Republic of China, and also the Taiwan Academy in Los Angeles, which are working together in concert with the Center for Chinese Studies at UCLA. We have been bringing together a group of really some of the most outstanding writers, filmmakers, and artists from the contemporary Taiwan cultural world for a series of events. It began about a month ago. We did a wonderful event with Professor Bai Xianyong and Susan Chan Egan, and we'll be continuing over the next couple of weeks with an event with Cai Mingliang, the Chinese Malay filmmaker, and also the writer Ji Da-wei and the professor and translator scholar Ari Heinrich. And so please follow us at our website. You sign up for our mailing list, you can get information on upcoming events. Tonight's event is focused around the work of a filmmaker named King Hu Jinchuan, who I think is a familiar name to many of those in the audience. King Hu is probably the single most innovative film director in the martial arts or wuxia genre over the history of Chinese cinema. He's best known for such classic works as Dragon Inn, Touch of Zen, and Come Drink With Me. And tonight we have a very special focus on two films that King Hu directed in 1979 called Legend of the Mountain and Raining in the, both of which were shot back to back in South Korea. And we have the perfect guest to reflect with us on these films. Professor Chung Ling was married to King Hu from 1977 to 1991, but she was also the producer of these films. She was the screenwriter of Legend of the Mountain, but she's also a kind of major figure on the Chinese cultural scene for the last several decades. She is a writer, a scholar, a screenwriter. She has been a university administrator. She has taught at SUNY Albany, Hong Kong University, National Sun Yat-sen University, where she served as the Dean of Liberal Arts, Hong Kong Baptist University, where she also served as Dean of Arts and Associate Vice President, and University of Macau, where she was the founding master of Zhengyutang College. She is also known as being the founder of the very prestigious Dream of the Red Chamber Literary Award. And I had the good fortune of serving alongside Professor Zhong for several years on the jury for that prize. And it's one of the major prizes. It's a biannual award awarded to the best work of Chinese fiction for a 2-year period. And Professor Zhong is the author of numerous books, fiction, poetry, academic works. This is one of her more recent books here that was published fairly recently, entitled Deep Layers of the Text, Cross-Cultural Fusion and Gender Exploration. She also has a new novel that was recently published. And there's just so much to talk about. And so the first thing I want to do is apologize to Professor Zhong, because we're not going to cover the entirety of her career, but tonight we're really going to put a microscope on these two remarkable films that she was intimately involved with. And I'd like to begin by welcoming Professor Chung Ling to the stage. And we're going to start just with maybe warming up a little and asking you about how you got involved in the world of King Hu's films. I think at the time you were a professor at SUNY Albany. And could you talk a little bit about how you first met King Hu and at what point you began to get involved in the creative process with him?
Yes, Professor Berry, it's wonderful to talk to you over the Pacific Ocean. Well, the first question is, how did I meet King Hu Jinchuan? It was in October 1976, 45 years ago. In the 4th semester, I taught in State University of New York at Albany for more than 4 years then. And I taught in the comparative literature department and also was the director of the Chinese Studies BA program. We had about 30 students majoring in Chinese Studies BA program. One day, one of the students, his name I remember, called Hao Mahmud, and he said, a famous movie director, King Hu, is in New York City now, and we can invite him to Albany to give a talk. And I answered, yes, although I have not seen his movies. Well, during the screening of 龙门客栈, Dragon Gate Inn, I was studying in Wisconsin there. I have not seen any of his movies, but I heard that last year he won a grand prize in Cannes Film Festival. Of course, we can invite him. And I asked fiction writer Yu Li Hua to invite him. Yu Li Hua was my colleague in the program. And she knows many people. So she was a friend, Yu Li Hua was a friend of Jiang Qing. Jiang Qing is the movie star, dancer, and choreographer. And Jiang Qing had been an old friend of King Hu. So King Hu flew in from New York City to Albany to give a lecture on our campus. With an audience about 200, we were all amazed. We were all amazed by his spoken English, which was quite fluent. And how did I get to know him closely? It was a coincidence. His lecture was held in the evening, so King Hu had to stay in Albany overnight. Since our BA program was a very small program, and we could cover the cost of his flight, but we did not have the budget to put him in a hotel. So I asked Yu Li Hua, can you host him at your home in Schenectady for the night? Yu Li Hua said, oh no, lately, the relation between I and my husband is rather tense. He would not be happy if I bring home a male friend to stay overnight. You see, 45 years ago, Chinese people were rather conservative. At that time, I lived in a small house by myself. So I said, okay, I can host the King Hu in my house for the night. But Yu Li Hua, would you please come also and stay in my home? As a result, that evening, 3 of us drank tea and talked late in the evening. That was how I got to know King Hu. Concerning the question, at what point I began to involve in the creative process of the filmmaking, and I have to give you the time schedule at that time. I knew King Hu on, this is rather rare information, very precise. I knew King Hu on October 27th, 1967. 1976, okay. And 24 days later, we got engaged on the 20th of November in New York City. And in early January 1977, I flew to India to join him. And we married on February 5th, 1977. So all happened in 3 months and 10 days. Wow. So from October to November 76, we were too busy to talk about filmmaking. We tried to know each other and to arrange the engagement party. And I was busy finishing the teaching in SUNY Albany. So our engagement on November 20th was a hot topic, publicized all over in the news media in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and among overseas Chinese. In 76, December, King Hu returned to Hong Kong, and several film producers already approached him and discussed with him about making new film. I think it was the publicity of his change of status from a single person into a married man. I think it was in January that King Hu and I started to talk about my involvement as a scriptwriter. At the end of 76, I flew from Albany to New Delhi, India, to join King Hu, while he was one of the jurors for the film competition in the 6th Indian Film Festival. So during the stay of 13 days in India, we discussed the possible theme of the two films. King Hu had in mind a story about a conflict in a Ming Dynasty Buddhist monastery, which later developed into Running in the Mountain. And I remember I said, I'm interested in learning script writing. And he thought it was a good idea. And I said, how about the other film? We make a ghost story. And he said, oh, fine. I love stories from Liao Zhai Zhi Yi, strange stories from a scholar studio. And I said, I've written short stories, but have never written a movie script. Would you teach me? And he said, okay. And that was the beginning of my involvement in film making. And come to think of it, how lucky I am to learn from a master of the art. During the Chinese Lunar Year in 1977, we spent our honeymoon in Macau. And what we did is hard work. Each of us started to write our scripts. He wrote that of Running in the Mountain. I already found the story, 西山一窟鬼, a cave of ghosts on the Western Mountain, from the book called 金本通俗小说, the capital version of storyteller's script. So it was originally storyteller's script and refined by scholars into 画本小说. And this was the copy I used. And then, in fact, I found it in King Hu's library in Hong Kong. Okay.
Wow.
So I picked the story because I was fascinated by its idea that our eyes could be blind to fact and human perception could be totally wrong. Just like the scholar took illusory world of ghosts to be real. King Hu taught me to write scripts consists of scenes, 分场剧本. And each scene should specify time, season, locality, scenery, characters, props, etc. And for the character, you have to specify their age, appearance, dresses, etc. And also in the script, you should work out their spoken words, acts, and expression. Everything has to be very precise. And I learned to visualize the sights and to invent interaction between characters. So that answer your question?
Thank you. Beautiful. Just so it's so wonderful to hear all of these detailed stories about these films that have become such an important part of Chinese language film history. Another thing that's so unique about this period in 1979 is that King Hu was not the most prolific filmmaker. There was often many, many years between each film. But in this case, you made two films back to back, almost simultaneously, Raining in the Mountain and Legend in the Mountain. Can you talk about why and the circumstances that led to these two films being shot back to back and how they evolved?
First, about making film back to back. How could it be possible? I don't think there are many cases in film history. This making two films back to back is King Hu's idea. I think there are three reasons for his decision. First reason is save money and time to shoot this way. Taking the advantage of using the same set of major actors, crew, equipment, and settings. Second reason, he was confident that he could shoot two films at the same time without mix up, without confusion. As early as his 20s, he often did several tasks at the same time. At 26, he acted as an actor in 笑声泪痕, laughter and tears. While at the same time, he worked as a prop master and set designer. At 30, he acted in Huatian Tour, mismatching in Flower Festival. And he also worked as assistant director, scriptwriter, and lyricist. So he was very much used to do multi-work. The third reason of shooting back-to-back is that two films are fundamentally different. One is in Song Dynasty, the other is set in Ming Dynasty. One is a ghost story, a love story, while the other is about power struggle in a Buddhist temple. Even though most actors act in both films, I think there is little room for confusion because they are totally different from each other. The meticulous execution of these two films can prove that King Hu's decision is correct. He is capable of mastering the back-to-back shooting. And how did these two projects evolve? They evolved because of simultaneity. It was in December 1976, about the same time, two producers, Huang Zuohan on the one side, and Luo Kaimu, Wu Shulu on the other side, they both approached him at the same time. And I can talk a little bit about the production side. Running in the Mountain, in the contract of Running in the Mountain, Luo Kaimu, Hu Shuru, King Hu, and I were partners, equally shared. The shares are equal. And Luo Hu, two businessmen, they are responsible to provide funding. And King Hu is in charge of all artistic aspects. And also King Hu provides many of the so-called empty shots, 空镜头, like he probably in 1976, he went, or 75, he went to use in California, Yosemite National Park, and did many shots of the landscape, and they are used in both films. In the 片头, in the opening title sequence, and in the musical orchestra playing in the Legend of Mountain. So King Hu contribute a lot in the shot he owned himself. And for Legend of the Mountain, both King Hu and I were hired by the film company of Huang Zuohan, which is, he created a company called Proprietary Company, 丰年影业公司, but his own company is 第一影业公司, the first film company. So King Hu was in favor of location shooting instead of studio shooting. So he decided on side shooting. And it was impossible to make costume film in Taiwan, for there was hardly any ancient Chinese architect like a palace, museum, monastery built before the Qing dynasty. Nor is it possible for King Hu to make film in the mainland China. According to him, he had to make, if he made film in the mainland, Taiwan would not issue visa to him. So there's only one place left, which is Korea. In fact, he already made film in South Korea. The palace shot in 迎春阁之风波, The Fate of Li Kan, was made in the palace of Seoul in South Korea. So Korean temples, palace, and the residence of high officials were all modeled after those in China, modeled after the architecture of Tang Dynasty, Song Dynasty, or Ming Dynasty. So only they are smaller in scale. So for example, the doors are very low, while the ancient building in China, the doors are, you can walk through easily, but the Korean building, you have to bow in order to go through. So King Hu believed that South Korea should be the ideal location for Chinese costume film. So I answer your second question.
Thank you. You know, you were credited as the producer on both of these films, Reigning in the Mountain and Legend of the Mountain, but you were also the screenwriter for Legend of the Mountain. And I'm wondering, you mentioned a few moments ago that King Hu kind of gave you a crash course in screenwriting just a few years earlier. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the writing process of writing Legend of the Mountain. I also know that it was adapted from a short story that you just mentioned, a ghost story. It's my understanding those are very short stories, and the film is, you know, a 3-hour epic. And so could you talk about the process of adapting elements from the story and adding original content, and also the role that King Hu played in this whole process? We know he was notorious for being so meticulous about every detail of his film's production. And I'm wondering, to what extent did he also participate or give you input as you were working on the screenplay?
Yes, in fact, when I wrote the script in February and March 1977, I always stop and ask him, is this all right if I arrange this place in the middle of the mountain with a pavilion? And he said, okay. So I had to consult him constantly when I wrote the script. Concerning the script itself, on how did I select a cave of ghosts in the West Mountain? As I mentioned, I was fascinated by the idea that human perception could be thoroughly deceived. This was the story, I think, quite different from the story in Strange Stories from a Scholar Studio, because they are more humane, more human element in it. And I have to talk about that because 聊斋志异, the scholar's story, is in fact the scholar's fantasy. You see, it is very much from the perspective, the viewpoint of a man scholar. And all the beautiful ladies are ghosts, but it doesn't matter. It could be his concubine, you see. But Song Dynasty storytellers' tales, the purpose of it is to entertain the public. So it has to be more realistic. And in this realistic way, they create a ghost story that was very much interesting. So I only adopt the plot of the original. As Michael said, it is rather simple story. You can tell it in 3 sentences. The matchmaker Wang found scholar Wu, a bride, Yue Niang, and who can read and play music, and used to be the concubine of a judge. And they married and led a happy life. And one day, scholar Wu went with his friend Wang to pay tribute to Wang's ancestors' tombs in the cemetery on the nearby hill. In the evening, all the ghosts came out from their tombs, and the two gentlemen were appalled to discover that Melody, her maid, and matchmaker were all ghosts. And that was the story. So in order to make the film, I add elements in 4 aspects. The first is the site of the movie was in the desolate frontier of northwestern China. Quite original story happened in a small hill mountain nearby the capital Lin'an, which is Hangzhou. And this makes the scene to be very vast, very kind of gigantic in its way. And the second aspect that I added is a female protagonist, the gentle cloud. As a contrast, I added her to be a foil character to the vicious Melody. So a triangle love affair could be developed. The third aspect is religious elements were added. All characters were drawn to the scholar because he was working on a script called Da Shou Yin, Mahamudra Sutra, a Buddhist sutra of Tantrism, consists of the drawings of hand gesture and notes to the drawings. The hand gesture had the supernatural power, supposedly, to communicate to spirits and ghosts, even today, such as Xiang Mo Shou Yin, subtle demon mudra, Jing Gang Quan Yin, diamond fist sutra, etc. He Yingqing, the hero, was commissioned by a high monk to edit and copy this sutra. The sutra was recently translated from Sanskrit into Chinese. And the purpose of this work was that the sutra will be used in a memorial service in the capital city for the deceased soldiers. The reason that all the ghosts try to seize the sutra is because Melody wanted to increase her supernatural power, and the other ghosts would like to be released from the ghost realm in order to enter into the next life, next incarnation. And the last and fourth reason, fourth addition is the main image of the time window is introduced. And Michael discussed that in your article. And the time window symbolizes the mirror of our mind. By the means of the mirror, one carries out one introspection so that one can re-experience the past trauma. The introspection would help one to do penitence and to gain catharsis. I wrote the script of scenes, 分场剧本. King Hu wrote the storyboard, 分镜表. The storyboard is more detailed, of course, than the script. It is rather King Hu made the film according to the storyboard. Therefore, the film Legend of the Mountain is largely the story King Hu would like to tell in a visual way. There are many images in the storyboard that were created by King Hu. Not images, okay? Many images, especially when he saw the actual site. For example, when we did the trip of location hunt, 看外景. he saw the Golden Rock Shrine, 朴岩斋 in Qingzhou, and King Hu decided this would be the home of cloud. What attracted him is the double shrine structure. There was a big shrine at the foot of the hill and a small shrine on top of the hill. And this is King Hu's drawing. Can you see the shrine on top and the shrine at the foothill?
Yes, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and the people there. No people. Okay, yeah. So in the film, there were several shots of Cloud's mother at the home below, and she saw Lama and the Taoist stood on top of the hill. Okay, this addition, I did not write that in the script. And there are many such elements that King Hu add to the development of the plot. For example, in my script, Lama should be a tall, imposing figure, while King Hu cast Wu Mingcai, and the Lama become a short, fat, and a little bit weird. Yeah. So did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, another facet of King Hu's films, and maybe one of the most important qualities of his films, is his attention to not just wuxia and martial arts, but so many of the so-called quintessential elements of Chinese culture. Peking Opera, of course, the martial arts, calligraphy, landscape painting, traditional Chinese music, Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism, the three main philosophical views in Chinese culture. It's almost a handbook of all of this when you watch his films. And in some ways, I feel his films have gone further than any other director in taking the aesthetics of traditional Chinese landscape painting, shanshuihua, and making it cinematic. And I'm wondering how you, as a screenwriter and also as a producer, navigated the incorporation of all those elements when you were working on the screenplay and when you were making the film.
But first, about his vast knowledge of Chinese civilization. I think the only other comparable movie director is Li Hanxiang. But Li Hanxiang was not that much into the landscape, the mountain and rivers, like King Hu did. Yeah. So you talked about the navigating elements of culture. And in fact, I don't think I intentionally navigate the element. I think it is because the story of Legend of the Mountain itself that enabled King Hu to instill into it his rich knowledge of culture. For example, the hero of the story is a Chinese scholar, 中了举 是举人, already passed the preliminary examination. Okay. So it comes naturally that He Yunqing was versed in calligraphy, literature, and philosophy. And the two heroines, Melody and Cloud, are both professional musicians. The name of Cloud, the name of Melody in Chinese is Yuanyang, which means music lady. That shows that she is not only a drummer, but she could play many other instruments. So these two lady musicians, were in the orchestra of the general governor's household when they were still alive. So they are talented artists themselves. That was the reason that I said the story itself enabled King Hu to display his knowledge of culture, because these characters are very cultured. In the original story of A Cave of Ghosts on the Western Mountain, Yuanyang is also skillful in painting and playing chess. 琴棋书画, it says in the original. And in both films, Legend of the Mountain and Running in the Mountain, this film were the first films King Hu made after he won the grand prize of superior techniques in Cannes Film Festival. The first film, it was the award, the prize was won in 1975. And the process of making film is 2 years later, or less than 2 years later. So in 1975, King Hu's status was suddenly elevated from a famous director in the Chinese-speaking world to the status of an internationally renowned master. So that is a big jump. As a matter of course, King Hu would feel obliged, I think, to show to the world Chinese cultural heritage. Professor Michael Berry wrote the article, Land of Wayward Ghosts, Rediscovering King Hu's Legend of the Mountain. I agree with him that the mass destruction of cultural relics by the Red Guards during the Cultural Revolution incited King Hu and to save and uphold Chinese cultural traditions. So these are the two main reasons. One is his status changed. He became an international director. And the second is he wanted to save cultural relics. And King Hu, since his childhood, had a profound love for Chinese culture. He read, studied, and absorbed as much as possible all aspects of Chinese civilization. So to give you an anecdote, the first time in 1977, I went to his home. We come back from New Delhi. And I was amazed. A huge room full of bookshelves. I think more than your bookshelf, Michael. So I was amazed. And I said, oh, Jinquan, have you read all this book? And he said, yes. I said, really? He said, yes. So when we were together, in fact, if he is free, anytime when he is free, he was reading in the toilet as well, you know. So he is such an avid reader. And no wonder he can accumulate so much cultural knowledge. Especially his interest so wide, for example, books about Chinese ancient costumes. As soon as Shen Chongwen published his books on ancient Chinese costumes, he bought one. Yeah, smaller books, big books. He just numerous books. I think some of his collection is in UCLA libraries. Yeah. The following scenes were not in my script. They are related to Chinese artistic traditions. So, for example, Melody did an ink painting of lotus flower. That was not in my script. He Yunqing and Melody play chess by the pool, by the pond. That was not in my script. At the beginning of the scene, the long walk of He Yunqing in the beautiful seashore, from the seashore to the mountains. And that was not in my script. But that was, I have an article about, recent scholarly article about that, which is, I think that could be likened to a horizontal scroll of Chinese landscape in painting. It unfolds, only show you the central part. Both hands were moving like this and show you the center part. And that was that remind me of that. I do not know whether that was originally King Hu intention. I think these presentations evidence King Hu's fulfillment of crystallizing the quintessential Chinese cultural traditions. Legend of the Mountain can be seen as a film that fully exhibits Chinese arts, including calligraphy. He did it himself for the title sequence. All Chinese music, single, solo, in the orchestra, and Chinese painting, chess, ink painting, etc. So I think Zheng Shushen said, oh, the Legend of the Mountain is a display of Chinese artistic tradition long ago. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I ask the next question, I just want to say a program note that I have a few more questions with Professor Zhong, and then we will open it up to the audience. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box, and you can type your questions there. We're going to start with some English language questions from the audience, and if you have a question in Chinese, feel free to type it in Chinese. And at the very end, if there are Chinese questions, we'll have a kind of Chinese language forum for a little while to answer some of those questions in Chinese, but do feel free to utilize the Q&A box. So my next question is about the actual shoot. And I've read many stories from Sylvia Zhang Aijia, and I did a long interview with Xu Jun where he talked about a lot of the very crazy experiences shooting these films. It was a very long shoot. They were over schedule, over budget. What was, for you, the greatest challenge of shooting the films when you were on location in South Korea?
About the issue of overscheduling, I really do not remember how long was the schedule and how much overscheduled. But I think it really depends on from whose point of view to look at this issue. Let us examine the span of location shooting of the two films. King Hu went twice to South Korea for location hunt. 看外景, that would not be included in the shooting schedule itself. But that's very important work, preparation. One trip from May 1 to May 17, the other from June 21st to July 7th, both in 1977. Totally working about 30 days, and I participate in the second trip. The team consists of 5 people, including an assistant director, interpreter, and sometimes a Chinese producer. And the interpreter and Korean manager were sent by our Korean collaborator, Mr. Han Jia-Cheng. In the 2 trips, he drew near 1,000 sketches, 素描, like the one I shown you, in which, in the sketches, both the scene and the actor's position were visualized. Usually, for an important scene, more than one location was chosen. In Seoul, King Hu also bought many props in local markets and stored them in our Korean producer Han Jia-Zheng's company. The proceeding work of the location, I think, is very thorough. For location shooting, the team flew to Seoul from Hong Kong on August 16, 1977, and finished shooting on May 4th, 1978, and returned to Hong Kong 2 days later. In order to shoot several incomplete scenes, King Hu and crew went to Korea again from May 31st to July 13th, about 10 working days. In total, they shot in Korea for about 8 months and 20 days, including inland traveling. If we split the time in two, each film spent 4 months and 10 days. And I would not consider that to be much over schedule to shoot a film of high quality. The location shooting of Akira Kurosawa, his Delsu Uzala in Russia took 2 years. Okay, so it is, if you put in like in the perspective of world famous directors, this is not long. If you put into the sort of Titan budget big filmmaking in Hong Kong and Taiwan, that could be a headache to the producer. Okay. Usually, studio shooting could follow well the schedule, while location shooting would encounter many obstacles. I think the greatest challenge was the obstacle that unexpectedly standing in the way. To give you an example that I witnessed it's happening, one of the important locations was the wood block sutra building, Changjing Lou, of Ocean Mudra Temple, Haiyin Si. After the temple examined the application of running in the mountain, in the application we would say this is a film about Buddhism. We promote the Buddhist virtue, Buddhist cultivation, etc. And we will let the world know how beautiful is Hainsa in the film, etc. So our Korean manager got the permit to shoot for 1 week. When our team arrived at the temple, set up the camera in front of the stone staircases to the gate of the woodblock sutra, a long staircases, and had our actor Xu Feng, Mingcai, and Chen Huilou as well, dressed up, ready to start shooting. And suddenly, a monk appeared to deliver the message from their assembly. You see, it is very democratic. They have assembly meeting. And the monk said they just voted to veto our shooting. And the monk said because the assembly thought movie by nature was illusory and would misguide people. So they make the decision, we have to stop shooting. We sent messengers and assistant directors, including myself as well, to negotiate again. How King Hu managed to overcome this obstacle is another story. So I don't have the time to tell the whole story now. So it goes without saying that the shooting schedule was delayed for quite a long time because we were waiting for a decision. Okay. So that answer your question?
Thank you. That was wonderful. You mentioned just now a little that maybe the shooting schedule wasn't long if you put him in the context of other international filmmakers, but it certainly was very different than, say, Shaw Brothers and the studio, the big studios in the Chinese film world at that time. And another big difference between King Hu's productions and the studio productions is when you look at those films, I'm saying Shaw Brothers, CMPC, Central Motion Picture Corporation, all of those other contemporary studios, the props, the costumes, they feel very fake, very artificial, just off the rack. They're all shooting on site and reusing the same sets. But one thing that's so unique about King Hu is his attention to historically accurate details when it comes to things like props, costumes, architecture. And I think a lot of people might not know in the audience that besides being a specialist in Chinese literature, you're also a specialist in Chinese material culture. You've written books on jade and many other aspects of Chinese material culture. I'm wondering if you could talk us through a little bit of the process on set and in pre-production that you and King Hu went through in terms of acquiring or making all of these, the costumes, the props, the swords, the inkstones, all of that, from my understanding that he was really hands-on and meticulous when it came to this. And I know you're also an aficionado of antiques, and maybe you could just tell us a little bit about this process. Thank you.
I think there's anachronism that I start to become interested in antique after I got married to King Hu. I started to be more interested in the ancient world. Okay, so the design of the props and overall design of Legend of the Mountain were all done by King Hu without much of my input. I did not participate in that part of the creativity. The creativity was materialized all in his mind. To give you an example, and I witnessed the transformation of a prop. When we were in New Delhi, for the Indian Film Festival in January 1977, we went to traditional market twice. At that time, even the story of Legend of the Mountain was not yet in shape. And we only know that the other story will be a ghost story. But King Hu already started to buy things. Among the things King Hu bought in the market, there was a golden necklace. Of course, it was not made of gold, 不是真金, but of some kind of metal in golden color. It is a fake antique Korean jewelry. And later, it was handmade by King Hu into melodies. Xu Feng's headdress. I show you the headdress. You see the circle? Like, yeah, that was made from the Indian jewelry. Okay. This is the same jewelry from another angle. So King Hu did not make prop jewelry out of the blue. I remember in 1979, after the release of the film, we went to festivals all over the world. And we were in London. Two of us went to British Museum. At that time, I just started to study ancient Chinese jade. So I immersed myself in studying the display of Han Dynasty funeral mouthpieces made of jade in the form of cicada, Cheng. At that time, King Hu was in another room studying the display boxes of ancient Chinese jewelry, Ming Dynasty jewelry especially. You see, his knowledge was not only derived from his early participation as a pop master in costume movie, but derived mainly from his study of the original pieces in various museums.
Great, thank you. You know, another very unique aspect of King Hu's productions was the fact that actors weren't just actors. They often played multiple roles. And so there were films where Han Yingjie was the villain, but he was also the martial arts choreographer. Miao Tian would be an actor, but he would also handle props. And Shi Jun, I think, also worked on props for some of the films. Can you talk about this kind of very unique situation on set where actors or everyone on set was kind of working together and performing multiple roles, and how that's, I think, different than most film productions?
I guess it is because King Hu himself is multitasked. So he inclined to demand some of his pupil actors to be multitask as well. On the other hand, this actor or other crew member, they would like to learn from King Hu, because in Chinese tradition, we have this 师徒关系, mentor-apprentice relation, and means 一日为师，终身为父, that kind of relation. You know, once you are mentor-apprentice relation, it is like father and son. That was why some actors were very eager to work as part of the crew. In Running in the Mountain, I'll give you 3 examples. Tung Ling played the leading role, Chung Ling, later become the monk. And he also played in Legend of the Mountain, the former secretary of Governor General, Mr. Cui. And he also worked as one of the 2 assistant directors in both films. So he has 4 tasks. Wu Mingcai played in Legend of the Mountain, the Lama, and also played in Running in the Mountain, Goldlock. And he also worked as action choreographer for both films. Also 4 tasks. Another example is Lu Chun. Lu Chun was originally hired as a crew member for costumer, and tailor. And he also played in Running in the Mountain, the old monk's second disciple, as well as the monk appearing at the beginning of Legend of the Mountain, also 4 tasks. I understand that they were paid by the additional work, and that was more or less a help to their long stay in South Korea.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll start taking some audience questions. So again, if you have a question for Professor Chung, please put it in the Q&A box. And this final question for me is about the different versions of these films. I know the first time I saw Legend of the Mountain was many years ago, and I hope I don't offend Professor Chung, but that version didn't impress me as a major work. And that's because it was a highly truncated, shorter version. And it wasn't until many years later that finally the original director's cut, the 3-hour version, was belatedly released on DVD. And there's now been a kind of resurgence and a rediscovery of these films, and they're now getting Blu-ray treatment with special features, and there's new editions from Eureka and all kinds of international distributors. And so I think, like a lot of people out there, we've come to rediscover the value of these films as the original versions have been made available much belatedly after their original theatrical release. Could you walk us through the process of all the different versions of these films, the original 2-hour version, the 3-hour version, the extended versions? I believe there was even a Korean version that was shot that was released just for the Korean market. And maybe you could help us understand how it came to be that these 2 films were not just 2 films, but were manifested in multiple versions throughout the decades in different regions.
Yes, we did the post-production in 1978. And for Legend of the Mountain, in 1979, when the film was released, there were mainly 2 versions. King Hu's version that lasts more than 3 hours, and it was edited by himself for showing in various international film festivals. And the other version is Huang Zhuohan's company edited from King Hu's version in less than 2 hours for theatrical release. The copyright of the film belongs to proprietary film company. And the long submersion, the disappearance of the film in the market was due to, I think, the proprietary company was not keen to promote it. They won't get much, okay? Especially if they try to circulate the shorter version. I don't think many people would buy that. I mean, in DVD form. from 1979 to 1975, both films, Running in the Mountain, Legend of the Mountain, has been invited by many international film festivals, and King Hu Film Company managed the shipment and the arrangement. After King Hu Film Company ended, it was the Hong Kong Film Archive, that film festival, contact for arrangement. And myself, I have some version, long version in beta form, the long box beta forms. And later, like friends gave me this version, long version. I do not know who did the distribution, but more systematically to restore King Hu's film is Taiwan Film and Audio Visual Institute, means Taiwan Film Center. They worked and restored a version of Legend of the Mountain that lasts 184 minutes. And this long version is based on an original negative, 2 color positives, and the original soundtracks. The Institute also restored Running in the Mountain, The Wheel of Life, A Torture Zen, The Dragon Gate Inn, and 4 Moods. And it was in this package. I think you can bought it now easily. Yeah. Quite a good news, isn't it? I have not seen the Korean version of Legend of the Mountain, but I saw the Korean version of Running in the Mountain. It was in 1919 in Taiwan Film Center. The Korean version used only a small portion of the Chinese original, and most of the film was made by the Korean company with a different cast. So it is a totally different film. So that's the end of the question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Chung. This has really been wonderful. And so we have a little bit of time for questions. I'm not seeing the questions. I'm wondering, maybe I'm not listed as a co-host, but Esther, if you can make me co-host, maybe I can act. Okay, now I can start seeing the questions. And we have a few questions that also came in from our students. We have a course at UCLA this quarter on New Taiwan cinema. And so we also got some pre-questions in from some students. And one of them has to do with the issue of gender. And I know that this recent book deals with gender, and we didn't really get to talk about it in the last hour. And so I thought it would be good to include a few of these questions to get us started. So this is from one of our graduate students. She writes, I'm curious how Professor Chung would comment on the 2 films nowadays from a more contemporary perspective, especially in terms of gender, aesthetics, and performance. I'm asking because classmates also have the question on how to comment on a film that's rather distant from us. And I would love to hear Professor's view on how you appraise this film from a contemporary perspective, particularly in view of the issue of gender.
I think Running in the Mountain, female character is rare. There's only one. But I think King Hu is a feminist in a way. You see, all through the film, not many people got enlightened. But Xu Feng played the thief, and she was enlightened. And she was the center of the film, very much so, as much as the handwritten treasure. Like A Touch of Zen, it was also a female hero that saved everybody, and the true hero of of A Touch of Zen.
Yeah.
And for Legend of the Mountain, I think it still follows the traditional perception that female sort of entice male, the two ghosts, beautiful ghosts, lure the scholar into a trap. Okay, that was the kind of traditional story. But I think King Hu, as well as I, give all kind of talent to those two ladies, while the scholar is rather a clumsy character. In that way, sort of we uphold female characters.
Thank you.
Would that answer the question? Yeah.
I think so. You know, I also think in some ways, when you look at King Hu's films during the 60s and 70s against other films that were produced during that time, he's actually quite progressive in terms of how he navigates gender. Come Drink With Me with a female protagonist. I mean, we were just looking in this Taiwan's film course at old Chongyao films from the 60s and 70s. And it's amazing how almost misogynistic and some of those films are in terms of women getting beaten and slapped and the patriarchal kind of oppressiveness that's represented through those films. And I think in some ways, King Hu represented a much more progressive version of women's roles in society through a lot of those films. There's another gender question from the same student, and this is a little more personal, but she says, I hope it's proper to ask about gender identity and whether it influenced your career. As most of the directors famous during that time were all male, I wonder the reason behind the phenomena and would love to know more about your experience working as a female filmmaker and screenwriter in the industry during that era.
Yeah, I think there are very few female directors, and Xu Anhua is a very good one. She is very much of her own and established her own style. So she could be among like internationally famous director, male or female. I think that was the kind of achievement we look for, female writers or female directors. It was the content, the kind of power that a work can be empowered. That was more important than saying that she's very few among them, etc. I think there are more and more female directors now. As far as I myself in the film industry, I think it was a accident I was in it. In fact, I think it is more of my nature and ambition is to be a writer. That's what I'm doing now.
Thank you.
It is easier to be a writer as a female than a film director.
Thank you. Here's a question from Li Ting Wang. She writes, it's really eye-opening to see how academics and film industry are parallel in inspiring and developing. Could Professor Zhong please talk a little bit about 3 philosophical roots of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism in Legend of the Mountain? And how is the shift from academia to film screenwriting like? Could you talk about that transition? I think we talked earlier about Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, but maybe the second part about your transition from an academic. Well, you continued to be an academic, but you also balanced this creative side throughout your career. And maybe you could talk about that experience.
Oh, yes. That was the conflict, the center of conflict in my life, which is when you took up a career like being an academic, you have to be really responsible as well, especially when you become an academic in academic management. And since I was 40-some, I started to be chairperson of the department, dean of a college, or assistant vice president, etc. That was very demanding, which means you do not have energy left for anything creative. You have to attend to problem solving, one problem after another, and you have to solve the problem, especially when you are in administration. It is the problem of human conflict. People has bad relation. You have to dissolve that kind of bad relation. So I don't think I lose something, because if I help people, I gain something without thinking about gaining. That is Buddhism. Okay. That was the conflict, because when I was young, like 20s and 30s, I thought writing is more important than anything else. You experienced your life in order to do a superb writing, a piece of writing. But then I started to get involved in administration. It became a dream. I can only write a poem or a short piece of prose. There's no energy to do any short stories or novel. So it was when I retired. Not that when I retired. So I stopped writing, creative writing, for 20 years. For 20 years. I would say from 45 to, or 48 to 68. 48 to 68. No, very little creative writing. My fiction writings were done before that. So when I was the college master in Macau University, I thought, well, since I already received since I already become an administrator, I have to make up my mind that I will do creative writing every month, one short story each month. So I did a very short story since I was 68, one piece a week. And I did it successfully. And I think that human will is sort of amazing. If you decide to do something, not for yourself, that was the key. Not for yourself. You were thinking that you have to write something to help others. If you have that in mind, you can carry it out. So I continued to write, and I retired 3 years ago. Then 3 years, for 3 years now, I published 3 books in 3 years. Because I think creative writing is very important. And these are the encouraged words for other people who intend to do so.
Thank you. While we're talking about creative writing, I know you have a new novel that was just published. Do you want to introduce that work a little bit to us?
Yeah. Well, it was called 余响入霜中, means the fading music of a Chinese qing enter into a frosted bell in the temple. That was from Li Bai's 五言律诗, one sentence. And the subtitle is 禅宗祖师传奇, legend of Zen patriarchs. Yeah, that was the book, a novel that described the life of 13 Zen masters from Damo to Lingji Yixuan. 13. It was published in 2019.
Thank you. So Chinese speakers, you can search for that online, and I'm sure you'll enjoy Professor Zhong's fiction as well. Here's a technical question from a student, Ji Yuan Tan, who asks, what does it mean to restore a film? You mentioned the restoration of some of King Hu's films. Is there any difference that we would notice, maybe as a lay viewer, from the original version to the restored version? And so do you want to explain a little bit to the viewers what that restoration process looks like? And for viewers who aren't familiar with it, what are they going to experience? I can say from my perspective, as I mentioned, when I saw Legend of the Mountain on DVD, the original version, it was an interesting film, but it didn't really grab me. But when I saw the final version, the restoration was not only beautiful and filled with colors that you hadn't seen and details you hadn't seen, but with the extra hour of footage, it was a revelation. It took a minor work and turned it, for me, into a real masterpiece. And so, but let's hear from Professor Zhong about what her take on the restoration process means.
Okay, so what you can see, for example, without this restoration version, what you can see is, for example, an old positive, a film, a footage in big reel. And if you play it on the big screen, it would be scratches, it would be snowing everywhere, etc. The color is off color, etc. So the film center, they use the original negative. They have the original negative, and compare to, and if some original negative is not clear enough, they use the positive to restore it, or if something missing, they use another version to patch it up. So I think it is a kind of painstaking, very minute work to restore the film, and very professional. Did I answer the question?
I think it did. We have one more question in the queue, but if you have a question, please type it in the box soon, because if there are no questions, then we will wrap up. But the question we have right now is, do you think there is an influence from King Hu on Li An or Ang Lee?
Well, I think the most talked about scene is the bamboo combat scene. And I mean, the simple idea that the wuxia combat happened in a bamboo forest, not on the ground, but on the tip of the bamboo branch. I think that is King Hu's idea. Okay, and the rare is King Hu's using editing to achieve the visual effect, and the other has many other modern technology to help them. One thing about I would like to talk about is also the 1975 the grand prize in superior technology in King Hu in the Cannes Film Festival. Would like to talk about that. In the past, I pondered why technology. You see, King Hu is artistic. Why talk about technology? It is sort of really a revelation that in the really backward in technology place, you want a technology prize. Everything is innovation. For example, one of the scene in A Touch of Zen, the sky, when Qiao Hong, the great monk, was stabbed, and the sky, in the sky, the sun become different shapes. So I think when King Hu was at the Cannes Festival, the jurors asked him, how did you make that? How did you create that technology? technology with that you create that scene. It's as simple. He just used his sunglass and move it in front of the camera that created that. You see, that's ingenious, innovation. Yeah, innovation, really innovative. That kind of prize, in fact, is in tribute to his creativeness.
Great. So we have a few more questions that just came in, but I also want to ask, you also worked on a film with King Hu several years later called Wheel of Life, 大轮回, and you even published this book. And I'm wondering, how did your approach to screenwriting change? Because of course, when you did Legend of the Mountain, that was your first attempt at screenwriting. And now after several years of experience, how was that, how did your approach differ when you did Wheel of Life?
It is rather something happened in life, okay? First is I saw in 1977, after I married, I saw the film called Four Moods, 喜怒哀乐, and King Hu shot New, the episode. And the 4 episodes were made by 4 different directors. So I was touched by the friendship of them. I think at that time, it's Li Hanxiang was in financial problem. So Li Xing, Wu Jingquan, and Bai Jingrui say they will take no director fee, free, to help him to make the film. Okay, so I was moved by their friendship, and also I moved by their artistic achievement. Each of them a great filmmaker. However, these 4 episodes were not related to each other. Each is an independent story. So around 1981, I was intrigued by the idea of reincarnation, 轮回, even though I was not a Buddhist yet. So I developed a story involving a love triangle. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm back. Yeah. I lost you for a moment, but go ahead. Sorry about that.
So at that time, I developed a short story involving a triangle love, in which 2 men and a woman went through 3 lives together. 3 incarnations. I wrote a short story called The Great Wheel of Life, 大轮回. And I discussed the story with King Hu and asked him if this would be a good subject for the collaboration of him and his fellow directors. And 3 stories are closely related because it was the same 3 main characters going through 3 lives. And their love triangle relation developed through life and death. So there is continuity. It happened that both Li Xing and Liao Xiangxiong was the producer of Taiwan Province Film Production Company, Taiwan 省电影制片厂. So they were interested in making the film. They asked the famous scriptwriter Zhang Yongxiang to write a script from my story. So the first life that occurred in Ming Dynasty was directed by King, and the second life occurred in Republican era is directed by Li Xing, and the third life occurred in late 1970s, was directed by Bai Jingrui. Passing through 3 different lives, the separate lovers were finally united, while the domineering and vindictive villain becomes subdued and repentant at the end. So retribution is at work. It is a Buddhist theme. So the film was released in 1983.
Thank you. So I think we have, let's see, 3 questions. Why don't we take these as our final 3 questions? And I am so appreciative of Professor Chung Ling for sharing all of this encyclopedic knowledge of this era of Chinese film history. And it's just so special for us. So let's move on to our last couple of questions. This one is from Ziwei Liu. You mentioned earlier that you were interested in Chinese classical ghost stories. And I noticed that you have also done research on ghosts in Western literature. Could you talk a little bit about the differences or similarities between the images of ghosts, specifically female ghosts, in Chinese versus the Western tradition? Thank you.
I think the image of ghosts vary in the East and West because of the difference in world view, different world view. I think in the West, you have this Christian belief that when people die, they were waiting for the final judgment. There is no long lives after life afterward. So while in Chinese or India, Japan, Korea, we believe in reincarnation. It is not the end. Death is not the end. So it's a different viewpoint. And also the viewpoint of evil and kindness. So you have the split, a very distinct split between evil and goodness, angel and demon, angel and Saturn. It is in the West, a kind of very split worldview. And why in the East, good can become evil, evil can be changed into good. You saw the Taiji Tu, the Taiji graph, Taiji ideogram.
Yeah.
Okay, you have this change from fullness into diminishing, and then fade into the other side, etc. So it is a very different worldview for the Chinese. That the ghost it could be changed into a gentle lady and befriend with human being and almost like human being, except that it is a dead soul. Everything else is the same. While in the West, ghost is rather horrible. Ghost is horrible. I'm talking about traditional Chinese story. In the modern movies, the Chinese ghost is also very horrible. Okay? But in traditional Chinese, the human being could fool a ghost. The ghost could be trapped by human being. It's a very different kind of perspective. Because in life circle, ghost is only one of the circle. 六道, one of the 6 channels. So it's ghost is nothing very strange. After a while, you get used to it, and it's like another person. It is like another person. Why in the West, the ghost is vampire. Very often, it's the vampire story. They are very horrible. Okay, they represent the evil side. So for lady ghosts, because it could be very human, so lady ghosts are very lovely usually, and lovely to the scholar. And I don't think in the West they are lovely ghosts. They are lovely spirits, but no lovely ghosts.
Thank you. This is from Robing Wang. Since when I saw several specific lines in the movie Raining in the Mountain, I was totally inspired. When Wu Fa Fa Shi, Master Wu Fa, told Qiu Ming, don't panic even if the sutra is missing. For a true practitioner, it is just a roll of waste paper. when I saw this plot, I believe the movie would definitely be quite famous. So it's a tricky question. When you and Mr. King Hu made these movies, did you have the feeling that you would gain considerable fame through these projects?
I think for King Hu, he already has fame as an international great director. I think for King Hu, it is to maintain his position or maintain his high-level creativity. That is more important. So when he wrote the script for Running in the Mountain, he was trying to put in the best of himself about his knowledge about Chinese philosophy, Chinese traditional value, sense of value. He instilled that into that. Instead of the previous martial art film. The martial art film, he instilled some Confucian virtue like 忠孝节义, integrity, friendship, etc. But in Running in the Mountain, it is more philosophical. So for him, I don't think it is how to gain fame. It is how to maintain or better himself.
And this one is from Xinong. She is asking about when you were writing the screenplay, I assume for Legend of the Mountain, were you thinking of the actors, just like Sylvia Zhang and Xu Feng? Did you kind of tailor fit the characters for these actors? And did that impact how you approached the production of the screenplay?
No, I think at the time we wrote the script in February 1977, the cast, it was still in the process of casting. It's not decided yet. So I just trying to create two very different female heroines. It's not model after the actor because we do not know who will play that yet.
Okay, great. And let's, this is a nice question to end with. This is from Jenny. And she asks, there must have been difficulties while making the film or publishing your books. How did you overcome them? And when was your most rewarding moment while working in the film industry? And I think maybe we can even just broaden this as someone who has such wonderfully rich experience in academia, as a writer, as a filmmaker. What advice do you have for our students who are going to face all kinds of challenges in life going forward, creatively or in academia and work? Maybe you can end with some wisdom about overcoming these kind of challenges.
I think in your process of better yourself, it is very important you find the right teacher. It just bumped into me that I have a husband to be my mentor of film industry. So I was very lucky. So the attitude is you have to hold a real good learning attitude. You are not just learning, for example, I was not just learning how to write the script, but I tried to learn about the whole film industry, especially trying to learn from the location shooting, observing how an excellent director works. So during the shooting of 8 months, I was 7 times in Korea, bringing goods for them, etc. And I was very eager to participate as an observer, viewing how he shot films, how he directs all the crew to work together, how he instructs the actor to perform, even model, even playing himself to ask them to model after him. So it was a very rewarding learning process. If you feel start learning something is your interest of life, and find a good master in the field and learn full-heartedly, I think it would be rewarding.
Thank you, Professor Zhong. And I want to thank Spotlight Taiwan, the Ministry of Culture, Taiwan Academy Los Angeles, Esther Zhou, the Assistant Director of the Center for Chinese Studies, and all of the audience who tuned in tonight to participate. But most profoundly, I want to thank Professor Chung Ling for taking us on this wonderful tour of these two really incredible films, Raining in the Mountain, Legend of the Mountain, both 1979, both now newly available in restored editions. And we really got such deep insight into how these films were made and produced, the challenges, and your reflections are just, we're so thankful for you to share all of that with us tonight. Thank you, Professor Zhong.
Thank you, Xiaobai.
Thank you. That was really wonderful. We really appreciate it. 非常感谢.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Professor Zhong. We'll follow up on email. Take care.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.
Whew. 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 Whew.